Welcome into the GoVols247 Podcast. I'm Ben McKee, and I'm joined by Patrick Brown and Ryan Callahan on this edition of the pod, a Thursday, August 7th edition. Tennessee is off today as week 2 of fall camp rolls along. Tennessee had practice on Wednesday and Thursday, which was practice number 5 and practice number 6. Again, they are off today for the third time this camp, and they'll be back in action on Friday and Saturday. It'll be practice number 7 on Friday, and then scrimmage number 1 on Saturday morning at Neyland Stadium. Josh Heupel will speak to the media following the scrimmage, so a big couple of days coming up for the Vols. We discussed earlier this week on our last podcast about how this was a big week for Tennessee football, and a big reason why is the scrimmage. So we are here to preview the scrimmage and discuss the storylines going into it, what we want to see, what we want to hear in terms of how we think that would be a good sign for Tennessee as the opener draws nearer. But before we get there, we want to talk some injury updates. Tennessee's been a bit banged up in the secondary and at receiver. And also we did learn a lot the last 2 days, so also kind of want to put a bow on the last 2 days as well before we preview the scrimmage in the second segment. Patrick and Ryan are both doing well, as am I. Patrick, what people really want to know is what's the latest with some of these injuries or the injury bug, I should say, going around the locker room.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of starters, big-time players on defense that are nursing some issues. Ricky Gibson is a new one this week, and Joshua Joseph still hasn't been back either. I think Tennessee is going to take the approach of let's get these guys as close to fully healthy as they can before the start of the season. I think that's got to be the priority there. I mean, and yeah, it's not ideal that they're missing time, but I think in this day and age, you've got to be thinking this is a marathon and not a sprint, right? Like when the college football playoff era with 12 teams, you're going to be playing into December, into January if you have the aspirations that Tennessee does. So, you would love to have those guys in practice going through every rep and not missing everything, but you also need them healthy for the season. And, if it's for the start of the season, fine. If you can get them on the field against Syracuse, maybe let them, you've got to be thinking big picture here with those guys. So, we'll see if either of them are back over the next week or so of camp. Our last open practice is late next week. So we'll see if either of them are back by then. I would kind of be surprised. And then at receiver, it's like a different day. It's like who's in, who's out. Still haven't seen Chris Brazel. I think he's getting close. I would be surprised if he scrimmaged, but I do think he is getting pretty close coming off that minor knee procedure. I think Micah Matthews missed a day, but he's been back this week. He had a knee brace on Tuesday and was in a red jersey on Wednesday, but has been at least going through individual stuff, and we've been out there. But Braylon Staley is the one who's been been sidelined or on the side the last 2 days. So again, they've got to be cautious there. And yeah, it's not ideal to be missing time this time of year because this is when players get themselves physically ready for the season. At the receiver position, you're trying to build chemistry and rapport with your quarterbacks. So that's the missed time is not insignificant, but in this day and age, I think you've got to make sure you're good for the long run. And so if you've got a chance to have these guys, if they've got to miss some time, you'd rather it be in August and these practices rather than during the season where they could miss a couple games with little things.
Yeah, think of it in the context of the regular season. If you knew a key player could miss the ETSU game instead of the Georgia game, you'd take that in a heartbeat. And that's kind of what you got to look at it within this case, with guys missing time in camp. Not ideal, as you said, Patrick, and probably in some cases with the receivers especially, maybe a bit more concerning than with the other positions because you do need to build some chemistry. You do need to – those guys still need to get better. Those are guys that have not done it at the SEC level. So it's not ideal they're missing time. But at the same time, it beats the alternative. It beats them having to miss game time. And I've not heard anything that suggests any of those guys is dealing with anything that's going to force them to miss time once the season starts. So I think it's not ideal. If you were drawing up a perfect start of camp, this hasn't been it from a health standpoint. And that's a downside for this team that I think a lot of people would say doesn't have a huge margin for error with those types of things. But we're still not talking about guys missing time. And this is the team already having to deal with some things like Jermod McCoy's injury or recovery from surgery, where he may miss, multiple games to start the season. You're already having to deal with some things like that. So to throw this on top of that, definitely not ideal. But this is a team that, again, we've talked about it before, has probably more talent than any team across the board that Josh Heupel has had. It's just some of it's really young and unproven. And if there was a team that was maybe going to have some benefit from guys missing time, this one's it, because you've got, like Josh Joseph being out, for instance. Caleb Herring and Jordan Ross are getting more reps as a result of that. They could use that extra work. So there's some benefit to that. Not so much a receiver where you don't have a lot of bodies, but at some of these positions, you are getting some guys in the secondary. Colton Hood, obviously Jalen McMurray's played a lot of football, but Colton Hood and some of those freshman cornerbacks are getting extra reps. So there's some benefit to this for some of those young guys, and it will enhance Tennessee's depth, I think, going into the season because of that.
But even at receiver, Ryan, to your point, those freshmen that Tennessee's going to rely on, whether Matthews, Brazel, Staley are available, like those freshmen are going to have to make plays. And even if you would like Matthews and Brazel and Staley in there consistently to help find a rhythm in the passing game, that is of huge benefit to those freshmen, that they are being drowned, quite frankly, in reps right now, and they need all the reps that they can get, because again, they're going to be is there a position on the team that's going to rely on freshmen more than receiver this season?
I don't think so. Yeah, and to your point, Ben, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I've heard some good things over the past week about Travis Smith and Rodarius Jackson. Those guys continue to show up. Heard a lot of good things about the mental progress, and Joakim Dotson alluded to this himself, but that Joakim Dotson has made, how quickly he's picked up the offense, and that he's a guy that could even help this team in the slot on some level. So I think all those are pretty positive developments. And yeah, like you said, Ben, they're going to have to rely on those freshmen on some level at wide receiver. And I've heard some good things about those freshmen kind of making the most of their opportunities with some of those guys out.
We'll break what I was going to sprinkle in some positive injury news. Miles Kitselman's in a red non-contact jersey coming off of surgery. It was a torn pec, correct? Something along those lines, but he looks like a guy that's going to be ready to play in the opener against Syracuse. So Miles Kitselman is in a red non-contact jersey every single game, but he looks really, really good moving around. And I know it's an upper body injury, so running around, he's going to be fine. But even, I've seen him reach up and make a great one-handed catch, like even moving his arms and extending to make catches. He's looked normal. You would not have known just from watching, if you didn't know that he had surgery, that he did, just based off of how his upper body is moving around. He continues to look really, really good. So there's some positive in there as well, and we'll certainly continue to manage and monitor, not manage. That's Tennessee's job to manage, but we'll continue to monitor the injury situations as this Saturday is 3 weeks from kickoff.
Mm-hmm.
So kickoff rapidly approaching, and we will continue to monitor those injuries. In addition to watching practice on Tuesday and Wednesday, on Tuesday we spoke to Glenn Ellerby and several offensive linemen. Thursday we spoke to Rodney Garner and LaVarn Harbin, aka Chop. So spoke to the defensive line coach and the outside linebackers, and also spoke to defensive linemen and edge rushers. And we'll kind of break it up in days as we go here. We'll start with Tuesday and the offensive line. Patrick, in speaking to Glenn Ellerby and some offensive linemen, what was the thing about Glenn Ellerby's media day that stood out most to you?
I'll hit on three things, try to keep it brief. The first is the center competition. I think that's obviously other than the quarterback and maybe the wide receivers, that's the other maybe 1C big storyline for Tennessee in camp. And it's probably not a good thing when your coach is talking about a player that's trying to be your starting center, still working on getting the snapping part of the job down. I think that's I don't want to say a red flag, but I wouldn't say that sounds great for William Satterwhite. And I think they love mentally where he is and that part of the game, but I think he's still trying to execute that part of it. And then, it's just the physical part of it too. This is a guy that's a redshirt freshman. He's changed his body quite a bit. I think he said in the spring he was around 275 when he got here and was up to 310. So like a lot of these guys has put on, the mass and this, added the strength, but I don't take that as a great sign. Now, I don't know that Sam Pendleton has run away with that job either. But I still think they're going to try to let that play out as organically as they can over the next few days and even into next week in both the scrimmages too. He also spoke really glowingly about Jesse Perry. Says he does nearly everything perfect. And I think he's a great story because I don't know what Tennessee expected of him. When he got here, he seemed like a more long-term kind of prospect coming from a really small private school in Murfreesboro that ran the archaic offense that never threw the football. So how much did he ever pass blocked? But he looks like a big time. I mean, he was at 270 when he got here. He's up to 320, and he looks like it at 320, 6'6". I mean, he looks like what you want an SEC offensive lineman to look like. They really like his smarts and how intelligent he is. And I think he's got some versatility too to help this team as a guard or a tackle. I think he's pushing at right guard, but I think he played right tackle last season, so I think he potentially could go out there if they needed it and be their third tackle. We'll see if it's going to be him or Bennett Warren, another redshirt freshman who was a top 100 recruit. He kind of gets lost in the mix with Hurd and Sanders, but and then the other thing was just talking, Ellerby talking about Lance Hurd, just how different he is, and just crediting him for the offseason he's had. I think those are the three big takeaways for me from Ellerby. But I overall in the offensive line, Ryan, I think the three interior positions are still, and I say three because, Sham Umarov, we heard from him too. He's really built really well too. He's built like a guard, really thick in the lower body. That's, to move guys on the interior. And, that's what you want. So they're still trying to work out those three positions. Wendell Moy will be starting at one of them, but maybe it's Sham at left guard and Moy at right guard. Maybe it's Perry at right, Moy on the left. So I think they're still working those two positions out in addition to center as well.
Ben, we can't take you anywhere. No, I would agree.
We're professionals here. All right.
Yeah.
I've never claimed to be a professional.
It's really just two positions, to your point, Patrick, that are really up for grabs. It looks like, Wendell Moy is going to be one of those guys on the interior. Looks like probably at left guard, but definitely noteworthy that he's getting some reps at right guard too. I think that's the key thing about this offensive line. They've got a lot of bodies, and this is obviously going to sound like an indictment on their development and recruiting on the offensive line, but I don't think they have more than 7 or 8 guys that they really would trust to play in a game today, and that's not ideal. I think there are guys that could go into a game, and Bennett Warren probably is in that category, the type of guy that you'll see them out there against some of the pushover opponents that they face at times this year. The ETSU game early on to be a good candidate.
UAB, Mississippi State.
Yeah, getting some of those guys in there. So you'll see them play. It's just a matter of how much they'll play against meaningful opponents. But, you know that if he's not a starter, Sham Umarov is probably going to be one of the top backups at the interior spots. I wouldn't be surprised no matter what happens in the center competition if you see both William Satterwhite and Sam Pendleton get some playing time in some capacity there this year. And then Jesse Perry, as you alluded to, might be the third tackle, and you could shift him over there if something happened to one of your tackles, and then Umarov or whoever's the top guard off the bench could go in. So you're maybe not going to see Tennessee go outside that top group unless there are injuries. We'll see how that goes, but not a deep group in terms of guys who are ready to play right now. But I do think there are some nice looking guys coming along behind them. Jeremiah Hurd, we've talked about. It looks like a first guy off the bus or kind of player. Bennett Warren's coming along nicely. I think they've got some other young guys behind them that still have potential. Max Anderson. I like some of the first year guys, Antonio Gumaro, Nick Moore, at center. So they've got some good long-term potential candidates, but still some guys that might be a year away, ideally. So you're looking at probably a pretty small rotation, although at the same time, Glenn Ellerby did talk about this maybe being an offensive line where they could play more than 5 guys, and we'll see if they do that. But that they at least have a couple candidates for that. And I'll be really interested in the scrimmages and seeing kind of what we hear about that group, because they are playing against a very good defensive line on the other side of the ball, and that makes it sort of tough to evaluate the progress. But at times I have heard some concerns about this group and pass protection and things like that from when they do have some team periods. So we'll see kind of what comes out of these scrimmages, how they look up front, and that center position is the one I'm watching the closest. I think Jesse Perry or whoever comes out at right guard is probably going to be fine. That center position, if things don't go well there, it can kind of derail the whole offensive line. So they really need to get that right. Sounds like they've taken some steps forward in terms of getting the snap issues down, but now got to see if you can get pretty consistent play out of that position and run the tempo you want to and all those things.
On the flip side of that, Rodney Garner has totally different issues in his room, different problems he is trying to solve. Ryan, what were your takeaways, your biggest takeaways from listening to Rodney Garner speak, Laverne Harbin, aka Chop, the new outside linebackers coach, and a couple of the players in the trenches on the defensive side. What was your biggest takeaway from when they spoke on Wednesday?
Well, as usual, I think they've got a good amount of depth, and I think maybe a little bit better than some people might have thought going into camp, because I think there still are some questions. I think about how deep they'll be at defensive tackle. Do they have 4, 5, or 6 they can count on? Dominic Bailey can help that number in some pass rush situations, but as far as a first down, second down situation, do they have 6 guys they can count on, or is it going to be a little bit shorter rotation this year? And who kind of claims those back into the rotation spots. But one of the things that obviously had to jump out at you if you heard Rodney Garner speak on Wednesday was what he said about Dominic Bailey. Pretty impressive to hear the path he has taken, and Garner admitting that was a player he didn't really love when he first got to Tennessee. That was a guy that clearly had a lot of work to do, and just one of those good stories you hear sometimes of guys who just stay at it, continue to mature and develop and do the things they need to do. And by the time they're a 5th year or 6th year senior, in Dominic Bailey's case, they're a really good player that their position coach, loves to coach. And it sounds like that's kind of where Dominic Bailey is right now. Rodney Garner calling him the MVP of that defensive line right now in camp. And, that's a big statement because he likes a lot of the players on this defensive line. And the other guy that I think you have to be, it's crazy to say this about, considering he's probably a number 3 on the depth chart, but Tyree Weathersby is a guy we've continued to hear good things about, and Rodney Garner clearly likes the way he's coming along as well. So I think they've got some pretty interesting talent at that strong side defensive end position, especially when you include Tyree West, a guy that I think has NFL potential. And then behind them, you've got a talented freshman in Marion Dye that could be a factor in some capacity this year, depending on how much work you can get him. So yet again, they've found a way to kind of restock the cupboard and have a nice number of options there. But yeah, Dominic Bailey, kind of the guy that I thought was, to hear some of the things from Rodney Garner, that a guy that you don't always hear a lot of praise from for individual players because of the way he challenges those guys, to hear him be so not over the top, but really, really high praise from Rodney Garner for a guy like Dominic Bailey, who's I think kind of been an unsung hero for that unit the last couple of years. And I don't think a lot of fans saw him as a key player for this team going into this season. Sounds like he's got a chance to maybe take a step forward and be a really important player for them.
Ryan, I'm the resident stargazer here, so I'm going to focus on some former big-time recruits. And one of the biggest takeaways for me from Wednesday was what Chop said about Jordan Ross, because it was so different from what we heard from him in the spring, when it was like, yeah, he needs to mature, he needs to grow up, he's got to take things more seriously. And, just all parts of the game, from treatment room, film room, practice field, all of those things. Like you heard him say that in the spring, and you're like, is it going to work out? Is the light going to come on? And it was a totally different tune listening to Chop on Wednesday, saying that, yeah, he's matured, he's taking things more seriously, he's in the treatment room, which is he needs to be because he plays so hard. Ross, I think, missed a couple games last season. I mean, he probably would have gotten 30 snaps against Kent State. But he missed that game. So that was a chance for him to develop. And listening to Ross, he said, hey, I didn't take it seriously at all last year. I didn't think I was going to play. He probably said, hey, I'm coming in behind Pierce and Josephs and Caleb Herring, and said, I'm just not going to play. I'm not going to take it seriously. And he said he's just sort of changed his outlook on things. And so he's a guy that physically looks the part of a 5-star. And I mean, they brought him in to sort of be that heir apparent and sort of help them replace Pierce. And, you wanted to see some steps, and it sounds like he's taken some of those steps this offseason early in camp.
And by the way, props to him for admitting that, because a lot of
yeah.
young players take that approach and never admit it in media sessions. I'm glad we heard that from somebody, because that's a much more common thing than people might realize.
Yeah, and then listen to Caleb Herring too, a guy that he just talked about how mentally he's in a much different place than he was last season. He said his confidence last season just bottomed out. I think he went into the season expecting to play a lot and make a big impact, and he really didn't. And I think that started to wear on him. So he talked about in January just spending more time around his family, spending time with his mom, and then ditching the internet, which sounds like a great idea. We don't encourage it because we are an internet site, but I think everybody could probably benefit from a month or so off the internet and off social media. He said it was a little bit hard, but then he got used to it. And I think that's just helped him be mentally in a better place and physically, he's another guy that looks like $1 million. He's got to stay healthy. I know he's had some issue. I think he missed part of the spring. He's maybe not been a full go every offseason, but a guy that if everything clicks, I mean, Joseph's, Herring, and Ross coming off the edge, that's a pretty good trio. And I asked Chop about, how did he feel about the pass rush production? He said that collectively he thinks they can be just as good, if not better. He said that they need some guys like Herring and Ross to step up. So I think those are two guys that, you're looking to see bigger things from this season. I think Tennessee probably, backfilling that rotation probably feels better at defensive end with Weathersby, as Ryan talked about, and then both those young Leos at that spot. Now they've got to figure out who's going to be, as sort of Rodney touched on yesterday, that 4th, 5th, and 6th tackle. I will throw in there that David Hobbs Garner kind of grouped him with Bryce Neeson and Jackson Moy as the top 3 defensive tackles he feels good about. And it was interesting to hear Rodney Garner talk about the what ifs with David Hobbs, because this is a guy that's missed, parts of 2 off seasons with shoulder stuff. And he wonders, what kind of defensive tackle would this guy be had he not had those, because, that impacts your power at the point of attack, your strength to be able to take on double teams and things like that. So, I mean, Hobbs was a freak show athlete in high school. He played basketball, was a great basketball player, played tight end, covered kicks, all that stuff in high school. And I think he's, that's another guy that they're expecting bigger things from, that's stepping into a big role, right? Because, on the lines of scrimmage, Ryan talked about the depth on the offensive line. Defensive line is another position where it's easy to get rolled up on, it's easy to hurt a shoulder, hurt a pec. I mean, things happen in those battles. So you need a lot of depth. Tennessee's leaned on a lot of depth. That's been one of their strengths under Josh Heupel and the staff, thanks to the culture and the recruiting and the development that Rodney Garner and some of the other folks on the staff have done. And so they're looking for some of these young guys to sort of step up and be difference makers. And I think they're starting to see some good things so far in camp from some of these guys that they're expecting bigger things from this season.
The trenches will be a very important piece to Saturday's scrimmage. That is something, as Ryan mentioned, we are very curious to learn about in the aftermath of the scrimmage. And there are also several other areas we are interested to learn about, and we will discuss those areas on the other side of this quick timeout. Welcome back into the GoVols247 Podcast. I'm Ben McKee, and I'm joined by Patrick Brown and Ryan Callahan here in the middle of week 2 of Tennessee fall camp. And before we jump back into our discussion and preview scrimmage number 1, a very important scrimmage number 1, I do need to encourage you, wherever you find your GoVols247 Podcast, if you wouldn't mind going in and leaving us a review, we would greatly appreciate that. And as we have mentioned on the last couple of podcasts, these are being posted to YouTube now as well. If you prefer to watch us talk about the Vols instead of just listen, if you wouldn't mind going in and subscribing to our GoVols247 YouTube page, we would greatly appreciate that. There are the video podcasts, there are player interviews, there are stand-ups from post-practice and post media availabilities that we have been recording. There's all sorts of content on our YouTube page, practice highlights, and that will continue in the basketball and baseball season as well. It's year-round content on our YouTube page. So if you wouldn't mind going in and subscribing, if you haven't already, we would greatly appreciate that. Patrick, when you look ahead to scrimmage number 1 on Saturday morning inside of Neyland, what is the one thing that you were most curious to learn about? We'll eliminate the trenches. I don't know that would be your answer anyways. But since we've already spoke about the trenches, let's eliminate that answer. What is the one thing you were most curious to hear about?
It's obvious, right? It's got to be the quarterbacks. I mean, you want to see who looks the best. I know coaches evaluate everything and they break down every throw and 7-on-7 and team periods and stuff in practice, but I think a lot of people and coaches and players will tell you it's just different when you go into the stadium and you go to where you're going to be playing games this season. So is there a clear guy that plays better than the other two? I think that's what I'm most interested in hearing. I don't know that there's been a ton of separation at this point between Jake Merklinger and Joey Aguilar. So this is a chance to separate for one of those two guys. So they need to go out there and run the offense. Coaches will be on the sideline. It'll be a little different. So can either of those guys go out there, run the offense as it should be, make the right decisions, take care of the football, and generate some big plays in the passing game? I think that's the biggest key for Tennessee in this scrimmage is this is an important checkpoint for the quarterback competition, and this is getting close to the time where you'd want to see, you want to have a better idea if you're Josh Heupel, Joey Halzle, and the staff of who you're going to go with. And I think the scrimmage looms large as a big point in this quarterback competition, Ryan.
Yeah, that's where I was obviously going to start as well. And the big thing for me, because I'm still very skeptical of the idea that anyone other than Joey Aguilar is going to start the season opener. What I've heard this week continues to back that up. I think just the way he's carrying himself, the way everyone's interacting on the practice field, it just kind of all points to Aguilar being the guy. So I think you want to see some progress in the passing game. You want to hear about some plays being made. Now, this is the double-edged sword we always talk about with any scrimmage, though, right? If you actually heard about the offense having a good day, everyone would say, oh, no, at corner with no Ricky Gibson potentially in this scrimmage and no Jermod McCoy, it looks bad. You got to have those guys back. So, but that's the key. I mean, we'll see. That's the other thing. Who's out there? Who's healthy? There have been some guys banged up. So is Mike Matthews going to be a full go for this scrimmage? Is Braylon Staley going to be out there? Is Ricky Gibson? I think that's more likely to be a next week at the earliest kind of thing before he's back. So, are those guys going to scrimmage? And if not, who gets some work in their place and looks good? This could be a scrimmage where a Colton Hood or someone like that is kind of the star of the show. We've already seen him make a play on the social media video that got so much attention for who wasn't pictured in it with the blurred out image of Miles Kitselman. But anyway, to have some guys like that getting a lot of reps, you might hear a lot about one of those freshmen at wide receiver. It might be a day for Travis Smith or Rodarius Jackson, but you want to hear one of those names or more, kind of standing out offensively. I think you need to hear some good things about this offense coming out of the scrimmage. It doesn't need to be just dominated by a really good defense. It needs to be a positive day. And then, I kind of want to see, related to that, do we hear anything about the tight ends? I've been really impressed by the way that group looks physically. Now, does it translate to there being some involvement in the passing game, especially if Miles Kitselman is limited at all in the scrimmage? Do we hear about Ethan Davis, Desan Brame, Jack Van Dorselaer, those guys being involved in the passing game at all? Because I think there's a real chance they could help Tennessee and maybe offset any shortcomings they have at wide receiver a little bit if they continue to use two tight end sets. Just how does that show up, if at all, in the offense? So I'm really interested in hearing just kind of overall what the passing game looks like, and obviously whether we hear specifically that, hey, Aguilar, sometimes when in these scrimmages behind closed doors, we obviously get to see none of it. You'll hear things that kind of seep out where, okay, maybe one guy's not head and shoulders above the other in terms of stats, plays, things like that, but like it just looked like he's the guy. From people who were there at the scrimmage, you'll sometimes hear those things. So I'm interested in hearing, like, what's the rapport like? How are they working with each quarterback? Obviously, I think the reps will be divided pretty evenly between those top two, but just sort of what is the overall vibe from people at the scrimmage coming out of that one on Saturday?
Now, let me ask you this, Ryan, based off of what you said about the quarterback competition and how you think it is going to be Joey against Syracuse to take the first snap. What if the Syracuse game was on Saturday morning instead of scrimmage number one? Who do you think would be the starting quarterback? Because I think Joey has some more work to do, and I think if there was a game on Saturday, I think Jake would be the first quarterback out there.
I don't. I think it would be Joey Aguilar. I think I agree that he has some work to do, and that's all. This is not to say that Joey Aguilar has been the sharpest quarterback clearly every day. I think it's kind of gone, to Patrick's point, back and forth, where if you were judging them just based on practice performance, there probably has not been a lot of separation to this point. I think it comes more from the standpoint of Joey Aguilar has carried himself like the quarterback. I think, let's face it, they went out and got an experienced guy because he's got experience, and that means something in this league, especially. I don't know that Jake Merklinger has shown enough to this point to where Tennessee is willing to overlook that experience and throw him out there in an important game, let's face it, against Syracuse to open the season. I don't think that's a game that Tennessee is expected to struggle with. But if there's another game on the schedule that pops up and gets Tennessee this year, Syracuse would be on the short list of candidates to pull off the upset. So this is not a game you can mess around with. I think they're going to err on the side of experience and all that. But that being said, and Josh Heupel has, I think, said this for a reason throughout the offseason, it's important for the team to see those guys earn it, whoever it is. And And so Joey Aguilar's got to go out there and to the point of what we're talking about, perform well in a scrimmage setting. If he were to go out there and struggle, throw 3 interceptions or something like that, that's struggle to corral shotgun snaps, dropping snaps, things like that. Anything like that surfaces as an issue in a scrimmage setting. I think that's the one scenario maybe that could complicate things for him. But right now, just based on sort of I think the way they're preparing him for the job, it feels like everything's kind of geared toward getting number 6 out there and ready for the first snap against Syracuse.
And Patrick, going off of what Ryan just said about the experience, I think it's interesting that, and again, I'm just playing devil's advocate for the sake of being on a podcast, and I do think Joey is ultimately the starting quarterback. I just don't, like on August 7th, I think it's pretty nip and tuck. Like I don't know that one guy has necessarily separated from the other. I think the scrimmage on Saturday will be very, very important. But the thought that I wanted to pose to you off of what Ryan just said, because Aguilar certainly has the leg up in terms of college football experience, but I wonder how much that will matter and how much that would translate to scrimmage number 1 when Jake has the leg up with experience within this offense and playbook. To me, it almost kind of evens out in a sense.
It does. And so, but again, I think there's no, we hear coaches say it all the time, there's no substitute for actually playing in games and the pressure that you get in, because practices and games are different. And that's why, practices over on the practice field next to the complex are different than when you go over to the stadium. And that's kind of what I mentioned earlier about scrimmages. That's why that's why this is going to be, I think, an important chance for both these guys to sort of, stake a claim. If you go out there and Merklinger's leading them up and down the field, the offense is going up and down the field, then, that's going to, any guys on that offense that maybe were leaning one way, to the point of Ryan bringing up what Josh Heupel has said about the players kind of telling you who the guy is. If Merklinger goes out there and he's got a lot of energy and he's making plays, and, that can sort of win him the job, win the team over, if he goes out there and plays really well. So, I'm kind of agreeing with both of you guys. I do think, I haven't heard enough to make me think that Aguilar's not going to be the guy. I do think it's not, there's not been a ton of separation yet. And certainly this is a chance to separate. And like I said, you want to see some guy making plays, but who leads the offense up and down the field? That's the big question to me. It's almost going to be like, who leads more touchdown or scoring drives in this scrimmage? Because I think that's going to be important, because that's what you want to see as a coach, right? You have a quarterback that might go out there and make some big plays, but if he's not finishing drives and he's turning the ball over, making bad decisions in the red zone, those are going to be factors in the decision making process for this coaching staff. So they're gonna you want to see some plays made at wide receiver. They're going to continue to sort of mix and match lineups on the offensive line to see what they've got there. They'll rotate in those running backs. It's just competition we really haven't talked about much at camp, because they go to a far end of the practice field. So, but to me, it all eyes are going to be on the quarterback. I don't expect Josh Heupel to say much, but maybe he will. I know Ben will ask him if he's got a starter yet. So that's about the only given that we know will happen on Saturday.
I'll throw this in too, because I've heard this from people who have been at closed practices that we've not gotten to see. George McIntyre's arm talent continues to show up, I think. So I'm interested in seeing, does that carry over into a scrimmage? Does he, he played well in a spring game on a day where the schemes are pretty bland. Neither team's doing a whole lot, but does it carry over into a scrimmage? He's going to have it, if he's working with the third team unit some or whatever, we'll see how they divide those types of reps. But even if he's working with the threes and still manages to play well, that means a little something. I'm not saying he's going to be a serious candidate to win the job right now, but that could come into play down the road if Tennessee's offense were to struggle with whoever wins this job. So I think that's at least something to keep an eye on for maybe later on toward the back end of the season, especially if you had an injury at some point. Does George McIntyre continue to show some of these flashes that we've heard about?
I don't think it's a stretch to say he might be the most talented guy in the room. I just don't, I don't think anybody thinks he's truly ready to sort of, be the guy physically and also mentally too. Because like I said, it's one thing to look good in practice and you get in a game and you've got a defensive coordinator, not like at Auburn where they're taking it easy on Jackson Arnold, apparently, but those defensive coordinators, they're not going to take it easy once you get to Saturday. So they might throw a lot of different looks, and that can be where a freshman quarterback gets tripped up. But I think he's definitely got a lot of ability, but just not ready yet.
Not ready physically either. He needs to add some weight to that frame.
And
But
quarterbacks talk about getting bigger and stronger, helping their arm talent too. So that's
Mhm.
an area where, again, that's going to be sort of a process that he's got to go through.
Well, George said this summer he could tell a difference in the weight he's already gained. It doesn't show very well because he's so long and so lean. The weight he's already gained. It's hard to tell almost to him. But some of his teammates have said they've noticed that he's up about 15 to 20 pounds since he arrived on campus. It's just because he is 6'5" or 6'5.5", whatever it is. He's got another 20, 30 pounds potentially to add over the next couple of years. So he still has some work to do.
This quarterback competition is the precursor to the big one, which is
the fun one next year
with George and Faison and whoever is, if Merklinger's still here. Yeah,
I'm glad you mentioned that, because that is sort of the subtext to what I'm saying here. As far as later in the season, does George McIntyre get a chance at some point this year, and whether he plays well in camp could kind of lay the groundwork for that. He's going to get some scrub time duty at some point this season. But yeah, if he were to really force his way in there, if the offense is struggling at some point, or something along those lines, or an injury gives him a chance, that could give him at least a slight leg up in that competition going into next year, which is all, I think we all agree, going to be one of the most fascinating quarterback battles we've seen under Josh Heupel.
Patrick, give me a player on each side of the ball that needs to really have a strong scrimmage number one outside of the quarterback position.
Oh, I had a quarterback ready to go.
I don't think, if we were talking quarterbacks, I think both Joey and Jake both need to equally have a strong scrimmage.
I will go with I'll go back to the offensive line. I'll go with William Satterwhite. I think this is, again, center is a spot where it's still up for grabs, and you want to see him go out there. If you're Tennessee, or if you're him especially, you want to go out there and just execute really clean, have a good clean day, communicate the call as well, help the tempo be where it needs to be, snap the football accurately, don't have any bad snaps that can derail a drive. I think it's a big day for the center competition as well. So I'll go Satterwhite on offense. And defensively, I will go with I'll go to any of those defensive tackles. It's kind of a mass of Nathan Robinson, Jamal Wallace, Josh Shell, the freshman. Can any of those guys solidify themselves and show something that can get them in, get them playing time? Because I think those are, listen to Rodney Garner on Wednesday, they're still talking about, who's going to be that 4, 5, will they go 6 deep? If the 6 guy's not going to be good enough, then are you going to take snaps away from Eason and Moy and Hobbs to play him? That's, that's a question they've got to figure out. So I'll look at those two competitions as sort of under cards to what everybody wants to know, and that's quarterback, receiver, passing game, things like that.
I'll go. We've kind of obviously quarterback's going to be one of the big ones, and I agree with Patrick on Satterwhite. I could just take the flip side of that, because I think it's an equally important scrimmage for Sam Pendleton. He's I'm not ready to say that it's a disappointment that you're hearing some of the questions about him still, but I think the fact that Tennessee expected him to be a locked-in starter when they got him out of the transfer portal, and the fact that he's competing for essentially now it looks like maybe just the center job is not ideal, and maybe a sign that he's maybe not quite as far along in his development as we thought, based on the games he started at Notre Dame. So I think he really needs to answer the bell, and I think Tennessee is kind of setting it up for him to have a really good chance at winning the center job, but he's got to go do it. And to Patrick's point, some of that's maybe a result of Satterwhite not having run away with the job in spring practice and throughout the summer, but yeah, I think Pendleton has some real ability there. It's just it's all got to come together, and he's got to be able to keep the offense on time with the tempo that when you do get to run up tempo and all those things. So I think the center competition is so important, and so easy to point to the other side of that one and just go with Pendleton. On defense, it's not been as big of a storyline, and I don't know if it's as much of a competition as some other spots, but I'll go with Idris Farouk because the safety spot is technically an open competition, and I think Caleb Beasley is another guy that's going to play a lot there. So Farouk, I think, has had a nice summer, a nice spring even, and is likely to win that job. But I think it's an important scrimmage for him to continue to build on what he's done so far and make sure that he holds off Caleb Beasley, who is a guy who's impressed some people and earns that starting job. So I think Farouk is a good player. He's come along nicely, and I think Tennessee's pretty optimistic about what kind of season he's going to have. But in a scrimmage like this where you're going to have a couple corners out, it's kind of incumbent on the safeties to hold things down in the back end and make sure they don't give up any big plays. So I think Idris Farouk, a guy that needs to have a good scrimmage to kind of continue to lock down that starting job.
Offense, I will go Star Thomas, because if he is not productive, I think Deshaun Bishop and Peyton Lewis will pull away in terms of how the carries in that room are distributed out, because I think Peyton Lewis and Deshaun Bishop are both positioned well to have big years. And I'm not saying this to suggest that Star Thomas is not doing well. I just think that there's a lot of reason to be excited with Bishop and Peyton, that Star Thomas just better bring it to keep up, quite frankly. Again, I really like that room as a whole. I think it's very much going to be like it was in 2000 and was that 23, maybe 22, where it was a true kind of splitting it up evenly between Jabari Small and Jalen Wright and Dylan Sampson. I think it's going to be much more of that than one guy being a bell cow and getting the vast majority of the reps. So in order for Star Thomas, I think, to keep up and earn his fair share of reps, I think he needs a strong first scrimmage. And then defensively, something along the same lines, I'll go Jalen McMurray. I think he needs to have a strong scrimmage, because when Ricky Gibson and Jamal McCoy and Colton Hood, who I think are Tennessee's three best corners, when they're all available and healthy, if that day comes, where's Jalen McMurray? Where does he stand in that room? I'm sure, especially he doesn't have any more eligibility after this year, correct? Like no random COVID year or Diego Pavia year involved. This is it for him. So with it kind of being it for him, where does he fit in when those other three are back? I think when those other three are back as a trio,
depends on Boo Carter, I think. You know what?
Yeah,
and that's
I mean,
the other guy. What's his status for the scrimmage?
Yeah, maybe Jalen McMurray slides in and plays more star than I'm anticipating. I think that you probably will happen if Colton Hood, Ricky Gibson, and Jamal McCoy all end up being very available and don't have to deal with injuries throughout the season. But I still view him as more of a true corner. So just looking at it from a true corner perspective, I think Jalen McMurray needs to make some noise to let the coaches know, like, I'm just as capable of these other guys that you have. So I'll go Star Thomas and Jalen McMurray, two veteran guys that are competing with youngsters with a lot of talent that just need to let the coaches know that I'm just as capable of producing. So those are two maybe underrated storylines or underrated position battles, if you want to call it that, going into scrimmage number one. But again, Josh Heupel will speak following scrimmage number one on Saturday. We'll have plenty of coverage of it. Of course, we'll have plenty of notes and nuggets from what we hear and talking to people posted on the checkerboard as well. Before we get out of here, Ryan, we're 12 days out from a five-star running back, the number one running back in the country, announcing his commitment. As we are 12 days out, what's kind of the buzz this week going into this weekend as we inch closer and closer to Savion Hyder making a decision?
Yeah, I think it depends on which side of this one you're on, because I think in Ann Arbor there's still some good vibes on that end and have been for a while. But I think that there's reason to think Tennessee could pull off what would be, I think, viewed nationally as a bit of an upset in the battle for Savion Hyder. It's one that really could go either way, and I've kind of mentioned here lately that Hyder's family is pretty tight-lipped. They don't like it when information does get out, if it's legitimate information. And sometimes even when it's not legitimate information, they're like, where's this coming from? So I don't think you're going to hear a lot from outside, certainly not from inside his circle, but even from outside his circle, I think it's going to be pretty limited what you hear leading up to that announcement. And it might be one of those deals where he doesn't really tell both coaching staffs before he announces to where something can leak out, because he wants to keep this one close to the vest. So we'll see. It's one that really could go either way. Tennessee and Michigan have both done a good job, and I think he's been supposedly the number one player on the board regardless of position for Michigan for months. So they are certainly not going down without a huge fight. And Tennessee at the same time has done, I think, a really nice job of just kind of quietly doing a a great job of recruiting him and prioritizing him the same way. And he's the only guy on the running back board for them right now. If they don't get him, it's sort of circling back and reassessing some guys you maybe recruited before, or seeing if there's anyone else who surfaces this season, or if not that, going to the transfer portal after this season. So Tennessee's kind of all in on Savion Hyder as well. So it's a fascinating one. He's announcing on August 19, as you alluded to, and I won't be shocked either way, but I think there are some reasons for cautious optimism if you're a Tennessee fan leading up to that announcement, and we'll see. Again, at the same time, Michigan feels good too, so it's one of those fun battles that we'll just kind of have to wait and see what we hear down the stretch. But nothing would shock me between those two, and I think it is between those two. Georgia and Ohio State have kind of, I think, faded in this one down the stretch, and it's kind of been obvious for a while that Tennessee and Michigan were the front runners anyway. But I think that's definitely the case here as he gets ready to announce a decision.
And it's a great time to sign up for GoVols247 to keep up with all of our practice observations, scrimmage nuggets, and also recruiting updates.
Absolutely, yeah. 50% off your first year, so sign up now. A bunch of people have already taken advantage of that. Definitely want to jump on that. The scrimmage Saturday will be a lot of gathering information behind the scenes and passing along what we hear from that completely closed scrimmage. You'll want to be on the site for all that Saturday and Sunday as we find out what we didn't get to see, and have plenty more practice observations as well to come over the next, week and a half before practice access ends for the season, pretty much. But yeah, lots to keep track of. Some interesting position battles still playing themselves out, and great time to take advantage of that sale on GoVols247.com.
Patrick, what can people find with a trip over to GoVols247.com here at the end of the week?
Yes, we will have practice observations on Friday morning from what we get to see. We will have intel takeaways from the scrimmage, and plus reaction. We'll hear from Josh Heupel afterwards. Continue to crank out some player stories as kind of this time of the year is kind of get to know some of these guys that are going to be playing for your favorite team on Saturday. So should have some stories up on guys like that this week. I've already written about Jesse Perry this week, Jordan Ross, and certainly stuff we've heard from the coaches as well. So plenty of coverage. We are multi-platform now. We have this podcast. We have our YouTube channel. And if you miss anything, finally have gotten up our Camp Central, which has everything all in one spot. So if you miss a day, need to catch up, you can scroll through that. That's got all of the player interviews from post-practice stuff, observations, highlights, our no huddles. Our podcasts are on there, analysis, all that stuff is on there. So check out our preseason Camp Central. It should be on the front page. And go check that out if you miss anything, and otherwise keep it locked in. Go check out our message board. We got a great community on there as well. So if you want to interact with some fans that just want to talk football as we get 3 weeks and a couple days out from the start of the season, GoVols247 is the place to be.
And we will be back early next week. I don't know when the off day is going to be, next Monday or Tuesday. I would guess Tuesday at their current schedule, but
they've got one Sunday after the scrimmage, I believe. So
we might pod on Sunday. We'll see what the weekend schedule looks like for the guys. Everybody's getting back to school with the kiddos and trying to get comfortable with that. So we'll try to knock out a pod on Sunday. If not, we'll certainly be back early next week on Monday or Tuesday. But as the guys mentioned, we'll have all the content and coverage you need in written format up on the site at GoVols247.com. For Patrick Brown and Ryan Callahan, I'm Ben McKee. This has been another edition of the GoVols247 Podcast.